All right, so we're in this last section, and he's talking about the idea that renunciation precedes meditation and realization. Right? So he's giving a general progression. Right? So, but that's what he's been doing since he started. So, chapter 1 is setting the scene. Arjuna's despondent condition, explaining why we need the Gita. Second chapter, he just blasts Arjuna with the highest philosophy. And chapter 3 is kind of where the sermon really begins. That's where he starts to give Arjuna what he needs to know. Because the second chapter, Arjuna is in no condition to pick it up. So the second, chapter 3 talks about action, karma yoga. Chapter 4 talks about turning action into worship, which leads to renunciation. So that's chapter 5, renunciation. Once you gain renunciation, then you can practice meditation, which is chapter 6. So this is the idea that meditation is the final sadhana for which we need to be qualified. And that qualification is the state of renunciation. So he goes through just and discusses different aspects of that state. So in verse 25, he says, sages attain the bliss of Brahman, whose sins have been destroyed, whose dualities are destroyed, who are self-controlled, who revel in the welfare of all beings. Okay, so one of the ways that we have any number of times described the world is using this term. He uses it here as well, dvandvas. Dvandvas means opposites, dualities. So the world is made up of, it comprises opposites, materially, profit, loss, physically, heat, cold, pleasure, pain, joy, sorrow, honor, dishonor, war, peace, birth, death. We don't experience anything that doesn't have an opposite to it. So we experience the world through the opposites. So that's just the way things are. The problem is not the opposites. The problem is the way that we relate to the changing opposites. So he uses this other term here, raga dvesha. So the term raga dvesha means likes and dislikes. So when we relate to the changing opposites through likes and dislikes, that's when we get this victimization. He talks about being victimized by the likes and by the pairs of opposites. So in this verse, he's talking about someone who is no longer victimized by the pairs of opposites. So he says, sins have been destroyed, whose dualities are destroyed, who are self-controlled. So then it's this idea that when we are practicing self-control, we gain mastery over likes and dislikes. When we gain mastery over likes and dislikes, then there isn't that same collision with the changing opposites in the world, and there isn't mental agitation. All right? And so when we experience mental agitation, frustration, anxiety, anger, disappointment, etc., when we experience that, the first thing that we should be asking ourselves is, what's the like or dislike that is colliding with the world here?
What's that?
The like or dislike. What are the raga dvesha that are colliding with the dvandvas? What's the like-dislike that is colliding with the pairs of opposites? The moment we do that, we're starting to look for the genuine cause of our mental agitation. Right? So that's, again, we've covered this any number of times. The cause of our mental agitation is the likes and dislikes. It's not the pairs of opposites. The natural tendency is for us to say, what's wrong with the world? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with this traffic? What's wrong with this political system? We tend to blame the world for our agitation. Now, as at other times we've covered, it doesn't mean that you just get complacent and let the world be a mess. By all means, put your efforts into fixing the world, improving it, making it better. And that's our obligation in life, actually. But while we're doing that, we have to recognize that that was never the cause of the agitation. The cause of the agitation was the fact that I didn't have control over my own mind. So the likes and dislikes are a part of the mind. So one who is self-controlled doesn't let the likes and dislikes define their experience. It doesn't, a person like that doesn't let the likes and dislikes govern the choices that we make, doesn't let the likes and dislikes determine the way that we relate to the external world. So this is a sage. A sage is self-controlled, therefore the dualities are destroyed. So for him, there's no sense of profit and loss. There's just the world functioning. The world does what it does. We experience loss when we have an expectation of gain, or when we have an expectation of keeping or maintaining something. You know, if I feel that my physical health should always be with me, that it should never leave, that I should always be physically fit and healthy, then when I get sick, then I have a sense of loss, a sense of having had something taken away from me. If I don't have that expectation, when I get sick, then, of course, body gets sick. Health, ill health. Now, it doesn't mean that you enjoy being sick, although there are benefits to being sick. You get licensed to complain and stay in bed and watch movies. But the point is that when the world changes, we don't change with it. Right? And the poem that we always use to illustrate this,
even this shall pass away.
Even this shall pass away. Right? So that one by Theodore Tilton. That whole poem is talking about the pairs of opposites and how they shift. Joy and sorrow, the good and the bad. He talks about his wealth, he talks about his popularity, he talks about his fame, he talks about his beautiful wife, and he also talks about pain and death. Even this shall pass away. Nothing is permanent. And so this is how we control the mind. So again, it's all very well to say we should control the mind, control the likes and dislikes, but a should without a how is more frustrating than anything else. So how do we control the likes and dislikes? It's using the intellect. And we use the intellect to reflect upon higher values. So that's the method for controlling the likes and dislikes, is to reflect upon higher values. And as we start to become established in those higher values, the natural expression is that the likes and dislikes don't bother us, or the pairs of opposites don't bother us. And so that's the whole poem, even this shall pass away. The guy, the king, knows everything is permanent. Everything is impermanent. Nothing is permanent. And so whatever experience he's going through, he's able to just let it pass through. There's no sense of wanting to grasp onto the good or wanting to push away the bad. Right? So it's not just an intellectual appreciation. You have to have that. You have to start with that intellectual appreciation. But you've got to keep hitting that same spot until it culminates in that insight, that wisdom. Self-controlled. Therefore, duality is destroyed, sins are destroyed. So sins refers to mental agitations. So a sin is a mental agitation. It's the effect of wrong relationship with life. So there's no wrong relationship with the sage. So there's no mental agitations. So this is someone who is able to meditate. In fact, he's talking about a sage here. He's talking about someone who's finished that whole thing off as well. But it's also, you know, we look at these verses, aside from just giving that final state, they're also giving the method. Right? And it's also giving us an indication of what growth looks like. What does growth look like? Duality is destroyed, self-controlled, no mental agitations. So someone who's in that state is fit to meditate, not otherwise. The other aspect, he says, who revel in the welfare of all beings. So again, the whole idea of sadhana or spiritual practice is to step outside of your own egocentric perspective. one of the methods that we can do that is by having an ideal to serve a wider community, to revel in the welfare of other beings. So serving a wider community doesn't just mean going out and doing stuff. It means having a vested interest in another person's happiness. You have a clearly, it's obvious to us all that we're all invested in our own sense of well-being. We're all invested in our own happiness and our own growth and flourishing as humans. Do we have that same investment in other people's welfare? Okay, it might extend out, say, to a family or to a group of friends or whatever. But beyond that boundary, we're not invested, we don't have that same level of interest of other people's well-being. And so this is what he talks about here, who revel in the welfare of all beings. There's no boundary to his love. So this is why he uses that phrase in the Vedanta treatise. Your home should be the center, not the boundary of your affection. So you use your home, that place where you do have that natural affinity, that natural affection, that natural care and love for the people that are close to you. Let that be the center. So use that relationship or those groups to kindle that feeling of affection and love, and then spread it. Keep pushing it out more and more and more. So what is it that I feel for my spouse, for my children, for my brother, for my parents? What is it? What is that thing, that willingness to sacrifice, that sense of identification, that investment in their well-being? So identify it and then let it spread. Invoke it using those relationships, and then push it out onto someone else, push it onto other people. It's an interesting question that, if I start to serve other people and get engaged in their life and their well-being, doesn't that just mean I'm increasing my circle of attachment? What's happening is that put it this way, why is it that we would seek to revel in the welfare of others? Why is it that we would seek to serve the well-being of other beings? Yeah, so the whole thing is put in the context of your own growth and development as a human being. You're not doing it just because you read it in the book. You're not doing it just because somebody else that you know does it. You're doing it because you have recognized the limitations of ego and the limitations of attachment and the mental agitations that it causes. And so you want to grow up. You want to mature spiritually. You want to mature as a human being. And so the actions of serving a wider circle and the attitude of wanting to see other people succeed, etc., it's a conscious thought force. It's not passive. It's not just something that we're mechanically falling into. So when we are consciously, I know what I'm doing, I know why I'm doing it, I'm seeking my own growth and development through reveling in the welfare of other beings. When you do it that way, then you're maintaining the awareness of the ideal through the action. Or to put it another way, the intellect is fixed on the ideal while you are feeling for the people. Your intellect and animals, all beings, your intellect is fixed on the ideal while your body is acting. Your intellect is fixed on the ideal while the intellect is thinking and strategizing as to the best means to achieve my goals. So it's by maintaining the awareness fixed on the ideal that you keep yourself objective. And when you're objective, then you won't form new attachments. It's only when we lose the ideal and we continue to perform the same action and continue to feel the same feelings, but without the ideal being present, bang, then we're forming attachments. So it is possible. So it's really important to have the ideal clearly in your intellect, to know what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, where it's going. Conscious thought force.